Hi, I'm Laura Halliday.
And I'm Simon Garnett.
And this is The Persuasion Game, the Forge's podcast about the art of persuasion and how it helps us to influence consumer behaviour, drive growth, and be better marketers.
Each episode, we speak to someone who uses the superpower of persuasion in their everyday lives, helping us understand what we can do to apply it to ours.
Well, Simon, we're in luck today. We're talking all things alcohol. Good time to be us.
Not going to lie. Good conversation topic. Looking forward to it.
So let's get real. When we're in a restaurant, we're trying to impress Mrs. G as much as we can. What wine are we ordering? Are we going for the second cheapest on the menu?
Oh, bail me out. Why don't you, Laura? I mean, come on. All my secrets. I mean, you know. Do you know what? It's a really great question, isn't it? Because there's always that thing of, you know, the second cheapest. So you don't look like, you know, the cheapo that you're kind of doing it. And I definitely think there was a time when that would have been a consideration. I'm not an absolute wine aficionado, but I do quite like experimenting. So honestly, actually, I'm one of those people that will ask someone, you know, will ask, what do I want to drink?
Not too proud to ask.
No, never too proud to ask. I mean, honestly, I have a little bit the same thing about when I'm ordering food. I'm like, well, what's best? You guys eat here every single day, right?
Yeah.
So, you would know. But I do think that's really interesting, that whole point around the kind of social pressure. And again, particularly if you don't really know what you're making a choice based on. I mean, there's lots of categories I go into it and you just see all this choice. And one of the questions I always ask is like, what's on what basis am I making a choice between paying, I don't know, 20 quid or 40 quid, and it could be any category, or 5 quid or 10 quid or 50p or £1.50. Like on everything that we do, there are different reasons why we pay for what we pay for. But if you don't know that, if it's not a category you understand, then those decisions are pretty arbitrary.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to talk about that today, because what we're seeing is with, core inflation being so high, people being very choiceful about where they spend their money. Actually, rather than it being always the second cheapest thing on the menu, as you say, some people are saying, well, I'm going to invest in really having the most elevated experience that I can. So whether that's asking for advice and then paying £5 more, people are actually looking to maximize it because they're setting it within a wider context of this being like the little luxury that I can have. Interestingly, did you know it's been disproven that the second cheapest wine is wildly overpriced?
Really? How interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder whether
Vindicated.
Well, it's fascinating. I wonder whether it was true. And now, as so many people
Everyone
kind of
knows
know, whether it suddenly becomes then, the restaurants and bars and pubs have sort of said, oh, we need to kind of change that. I mean, I buy loads of my wine from Lidl. It's great wine, and the prices are superb. They've got really easy ways to kind of help people, actually navigate what it is they're buying. They've got their sort of point score, so you can kind of see what it is and those kinds of things. And again, it's like, well, that is so, they've done such a great job of making that feel like, yes, it's that little treat, it's that little thing that's available for you, but doing it in a way that kind of feels accessible and doesn't feel like something that only a few people can have.
I think that's a brilliant example, because it's somewhere where people are actually willing to spend more on wine, but the value that they're tapping into is very different from perhaps historically what it might have been. It's not the Thresher's experience. It's not the sort of concierge advice on wine, but it is actually the quality. And there's a sense of sort of having hacked value in some way by going in there and, what I've actually paid for is the quality of the wine.
Yeah. Rather than exactly right. Rather than anything that is, I don't know, just a badge value or just, unnecessary stuff. It makes you feel that what you're paying for is absolutely the quality inside that bottle, and not just because someone's got a bit greedy, just decided to charge, 5 times as much than the bottle's worth.
And that's something we want to talk about with today's guest, which is people are still spending on luxury goods. In fact, in 2023, Deloitte survey showed that 22% of people were still investing in luxury goods, which is quite surprising when you think that core inflation was incredibly high. Cost of living was really making people in the UK feel the pinch. But to your point, what are they actually framing value as? You know, it might not be going in and having that concierge experience with the wine expert. It might be being your own expert and really feeling like you've hacked the system to get, you know, better quality in the bottle itself. Talking about what levers to pull and what makes people feel like something is worth it is something will be really interesting to explore today. This episode, we're going to be joined by Paul Thomas, International Insight Director and Global Head of Shopper Insight at Suntory. He's worked for Kinder Surprise, Ferrero Rocher, Johnny Walker, Tanqueray, Guinness, and Peroni. Drinks are on him. He's going to teach us all about how he's on a mission to make consumer planning and insight the lifeblood of every business he works for, and also talk a little bit about how he sways audiences into the luxurious side of spirits, both internally and with consumers. And as legal have kindly reminded us, when we're talking about alcohol, obviously we will be talking about audiences of legal drinking age, including when we refer to Gen Z. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Simon. Hi, Laura. Nice to be here.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you. Paul, tell us a little bit about your role at Suntory Global Spirits. What are you responsible for? What do you look after?
So I look after all the research for our EMEA region. So in Suntory terms, that means not the US and not Asia, but pretty much everywhere else. I also look after our global shopper capability. So I sort of have two hats, but sadly I'm only paid for one role.
Them's the rubs, my friend. Them's the
Exactly.
rubs. Start by telling us a little bit about some of the kind of consumer insight and sort of behavioural challenges, really, that you look after.
I think those are really great questions. I mean, currently within the alcohol industry, you've got two big mega forces, two big sharks in the water. The first is health and people monitoring their behaviour and, you know, wearables and people more and more aware of their physical and mental health, which obviously is a huge positive, but it's a challenge for that industry. So a big behaviour change you need to try and get across to consumers is, well, alcohol can still be part of that lifestyle, but not perhaps the way it was 20 years ago. And then the second, yet to be alleviated by our new government, give them time, is it's really tough out there. You know, it's across the whole world financially. It's better than it was a couple of years ago, but it's much worse than it was before COVID. So alcohol is a discretionary purchase. You've got to try and make them understand why that should be part of their spend, even though their overall spending ability is getting lower day by day.
You made a great point about cost of living, and obviously that's affected different markets in different ways. What are some of the levers that you've been pulling to try and persuade people to be part of that discretionary spend?
Well, I think alcohol has an advantage that we often call it a lipstick category.
Right.
Insofar as however tough times are, you know, certainly my wife will still spend a lot of money on makeup and lipstick, however tough times are. And alcohol's a little bit the same. Our job, also in the light of the challenge of people wanting generally to drink less as a pattern, is to try and persuade consumers to not think about volume and bang for buck, but to think about quality.
So you're kind of pairing up the two challenges of increased moderation and trying to like actually make that into a benefit for a premium proposition.
Well, exactly. I mean, to a certain extent, we'd love to take credit, but consumers do it for us. You know, we are seeing huge trends in all food categories as well, beer, where people are going, look, I don't just want volume. Volume isn't what I'm after. What I'm after is not 10 drinks, it's 2 really good ones. There was a stat in some research I saw, which, you know, maybe I'm in the wrong camp. Something like 70% of UK consumers would rather have fewer drinks but better ones, which if you've asked that 10 years ago, you couldn't have imagined it. 20 years ago, no chance.
And that leads to a really interesting question, which is, how do you define better?
Yes.
What is a better drink?
Yeah, really good question. I think the first thing to say is better is entirely subjective. You know, it's the equivalent of your mum bringing out the better china. You know, the china might still be rubbish, but it's better than what it was before. So everyone has their own version of premium. So if you are at a certain point on the pricing ladder, just not buying the own label one is a premium purchase. If you are a highly wealthy person at the top end, it's suddenly, well, my $500 bottle of whiskey isn't enough anymore. I'm going to spend $1,000. So firstly, it's all subjective. Secondly, then, you know, what are the levers that make people willing to spend more? When it comes to spirits and beer in general, because fundamentally it all has the same end result, it's all about working out what matters to people, because fundamentally all premium is, if you want to simplify it, is being willing to pay more for something that matters to you. That might be, for some people, and I'll look at you, Simon, a whiskey that you know is net positive from a carbon point of view, from a sustainability point of view. You might go, actually, that's something that really matters to me. I'm willing to pay extra for that. For other people, it might be the provenance. It's a whiskey that's been in the Philippines. I've never heard of that before. I'd like to try it. For other people, I've heard that it's triple distilled. That means it's purer. For some people, it's the packaging. It looks nice. And then the final thing really is, what we mustn't forget is, all of those sounds really good and rational and thought through reasons. There's also just the fact we all want to look quite good and project an image of ourselves. There's so many different reasons why people are willing to pay more. It's just working out which your brand has a right to play with, probably.
I was really interested in your point about, anything better than own label for some people is the premium. And actually what we've seen with a number of other categories is that, people are very worried about private label because there's a feeling of parity, and certainly in terms of once it's been tried, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. But it feels like alcohol's been quite resistant to that so far. And you also taking on a retail role, we were just talking about how much the retail landscape for alcohol has changed, that actually going to Lidl, Aldi, finding a really great bottle of wine and sort of feeling quite proud of that is something that a lot of people can relate to. Do you think some of the sort of cues and codes around shopper behaviour have changed when it comes to premium as well?
So we know from a lot of research we've done that the more you're going to spend, the more research you do up front. So without giving away any exact figures, I think you engage with double the number of touch points for a premium purchase in your total shopper journey compared to a mainstream purchase, where it's much more, I'm going to go to Tesco and I'm going to find what's on offer. If it's an acceptable brand to me, ka-ching, put it in my basket, go home. Some shoppers buying at the higher end of spirits will engage with 6, 7, 8 touch points before they even go to the store. Yeah. They'll research online. They'll go to the brand website. They'll go to Amazon reviews. But yes, we are seeing more and more that you almost have to win with the shopper before they get to the supermarket. The average shopper has 8 whiskey brands in mind when they go to a supermarket. So number one, you've got to be in one of the 8. That's already quite a big challenge, because the average retailer might stock 100. So you've got to be in the top 10. And then you've got to try and break through in store. You've got to, whether it's through, you've got to have your fundamentals, distribution, availability, display and impact. And then fundamentally, you've got to give them a reason to buy you. And that's more than just price.
So in terms then of influencing that and persuading that decision, feels like there's an awful lot more different things that you have to line up. It is not just a straight shootout kind of when people are at the shelf that am I just trying to influence decision A or B? But actually it's all the kind of groundwork that you're doing before they even get to that. The great news from a marketing point of view is it makes us be truly omni-channel. You can't just think about your shopper strategy versus your consumer, or your ATL versus your BTL. You have to think, what's the full plan to reach this person? Because the second the decision comes down to only in store, it becomes a shoot-off about price. Right. And we have seen that, particularly in the world of beer, where even some of the more premium ones, so here's a statistic for you, 70% of Peroni is sold on deal in the UK, and that's the most premium of most of the lagers. But people are so used to that category being price promoted that they just wait for it to be on offer and stock up. In spirits, yes, there are brands that rely on promotional battles, Gordon's versus Beefeater, Smirnoff versus whoever else it might be. I suddenly had a blank on all vodka brands, that's bad.
Absolute.
Yeah, absolute. Yeah, why not? But the higher you go, the less important that price and promo is. Doesn't mean it's not important. Doesn't mean I turn down a brand because it's on promo, but you're not so reliant on that. And that's good, because the second you get into that point, I can tell you as a confectioner, when I worked at Ferrero, in order to sell in the discounters, we didn't make any money on any chocolate we sold there. I can tell you that when I've worked for beer companies, your margins get down to single digits just so you can sell on promo And then you've got to pay the privilege of being on promo in those retailers as well. So the more you can do to build the brand equity up front, hopefully when the shopper gets in store, that mental availability will hold. Provided you're there and you're an acceptable price point and you're visible, you then hope they'll go on to pick you.
One of the things that I always think is fascinating in this world, particularly in this sort of premium spirits world, is that you've absolutely got an audience who are, for want of a better word, love the geeking out on this, right? Love the stories, love the provenance, the backstory, the kind of history of it, the absolute nuance. And there's a lot of language that comes with that, which frankly is pretty inaccessible to the average person. But that's such a sort of core of fandom. And yet, as you said yourself, you've also got a load of people that probably are buying it because of how I might look, because it kind of looks quite cool, great packaging, etc. How do you go about balancing that persuasion when at best you've got audiences that are influenced and persuaded by different things, and possibly at worst that actually the thing that persuades one audience almost alienates the other audience?
Look, I think I'm going to give you an example of a brand here, which is Monkey Shoulder, which has come through and massively disrupted whiskey. If you look into it, it's got all the credentials of anyone out there. It's a fantastic product. At the same time, it is fun. It appears at music festivals. It's done all the activations. And also, let's not forget the most important thing, it tastes bloody nice. Most people, the one thing that unites everyone, there might be some exceptions where there's a benefit for tasting a bit challenging because you want to be able to say you can do it. But for 99% of people, the number one reason they want to drink is because it tastes good. So the way to appeal to everyone is by never forgetting to remind people how good it tastes. Because the purchase frequency for a bottle of whiskey is less than once per year in a retailer. So don't assume that people remember exactly how it tastes. Tell them smoky, subtle, honey, vanilla, whatever it might be. Plus make sure you have beautiful packaging. I think the whiskey category for many years forgot the need to look good. All of the semiotics of the packaging was identical. You'd have white label, black or blue font for the brand name, aged 18 years, picture of a deer or some rolling Scottish Highlands, and then something indecipherable about where it was built. All the brands look like that. Now you see much more cut through in terms of trying to be different, trying to be engaging. So yeah, I think whiskey is I hate to say it, but a traditionally dusty old man category is having to dust off its smoking jacket and get some more modern threads and try and appeal to more people through how it looks and feels as well.
Like one of your legendary flowery shirts, Paul.
Well, that is a niche audience.
Well, there you go. There you go. But on a more serious note, what it does make me think, which is really interesting, is this idea of breaking the rules, of standing out and persuading by doing something completely different to what other people do. And I guess whenever a brand or business tries to do that, there's enormous risk with that, right? Potentially enormous upside, because you might be able to completely stand out, do something that nobody else has done, but with that, some significant risk.
Sipsmith has a wonderful story about being the gin which started the craft revolution, because it was the gin brand that appealed to the government to repeal the old gin production laws. So right back to the 1700s, gin was prohibited to be produced above a huge amount, because basically you had people, probably like me back in the time, producing really dodgy, really dangerous, high ABV stuff. So the government banned it. You've seen like the paintings of Gin Lane. That's where all that comes from. So it was Sipsmith that came along and threw this out of court. It was rebellious. It started the craft revolution. Then it didn't tell anyone about it. And, 20 years later now, it still hasn't told people about it. And I think often what I observe in marketing isn't a willingness to take a risk. It's a willingness to be proud of it and tell people about it. That sort of under the bushel thing that so many marketers have. Oh, people won't want to hear about that. Consumers are desperate to hear something different because they hear the same all the time. The honest truth is there are very few brands that do take risks, is the honest truth. Most play it safe, and they'll either grow with the category or decline with the category, and they'll get lucky with their pricing and promo strategy. You could take Guinness as a brand that does break the rules and do things differently. But outside that and the Sitsmith example, there are very, very few, honestly.
That's really interesting, the point you make about brands not perhaps feeling confident or willing to tell their stories, their truths that they have. Why do you think that might be? Is there a fear? Is there a reluctance?
There is no one more bored than a brand marketer. A brand marketer every day reads their brand DNA documents. They do 100 documents that have got their brand logo on it that talks about their brand history. So they know it inside out. They forget that consumers really don't, and that the number of brand stories that any of us have got in our head is minimal. How do you build brand stories? You keep telling them and you're consistent. So you've got all these wonderful stories and they're hidden at the back of a brand document. So you've got marketers who think everyone knows it, marketers who get bored of the same campaign, and then finally creators who don't push it. So you end up with big brand purpose ads or generic stuff or stuff that you change year on year.
I wanted to ask about reaching people through new channels and thinking about reaching new audiences. I'm trying to remember the exact expression, but essentially when people take photos of their food, they say, the camera eats first.
Well, I mean, let's talk about cocktails. I think we did some research in Germany, Spain, the UK and Australia. In those markets, over 70% of cocktail drinkers regularly posted pretty cocktails on Instagram. They're never going to post the bottle. Our equity is built to a large extent in the on-trade, right? You try it, it's beautifully served by an expert mixologist, or maybe you take part in a fantastic activation with the brand. And that builds a memory, that builds memory structures that then help you to overcome that. So seeing it on social media, seeing a beautiful cocktail. I mean, a really good example of it done very simply was Gordon's Pink. Sadly, wasn't my innovation when I was at Diageo. I was Tanqueray Sevilla, the second biggest. Gordon's was the first, the buggers, but that'll do.
Pips at the post, Paul, unlucky.
It was a category that had kind of lost its vavavoom in many ways. Lots of people like pink. You've only got to see the recent success of Barbie as a film, great film as well. Simply by creating a beautiful pink drink that you could make at home, pink gin, tonic, slice of something in a beautiful rounded glass, that's Instagrammable. Glassware is another absolutely fantastic way that we can do it. Beer does it better than spirits, but it can also be done through spirits. If you want people to take photos of you, make it beautiful. It's as simple as that. And there are very few more enjoyable things, certainly things that we can talk about here, than good food and good drink, right? You want people to know that you've got a beautiful cocktail. So we, as an industry, we're in a really good position to leverage that kind of social currency and social trends.
Thinking about social currency, it feels like status and what is prestigious has evolved a lot, especially when you're talking to millennials or legal drinking age Gen Z. How is status seen today, and how does that inform what you do in your marketing?
I mean, whiskey traditionally is stuck in old world status, right? We all know that. However, what we shouldn't forget is Gen Z and younger millennials like myself who grew up in social media age. We have more abilities to project status than anyone ever did before. Now, every day, if I want to, I can show people how good my life is. Not me personally, but one could. So there's often a misassumption about Gen Z, which is, they're all into community causes and it's all very ethical and equitable. They are a generation that has the capability to project status more than anything else. Social causes are, being a brand associated with the right social cause is a projection as well. Brands can do that really well and really authentically. To name an example, Talisker from Diageo does a huge amount of work about reclaiming rubbish in the sea. They can do that because their distillery is built on the sea and it's integral to it. So that's another way of sort of building status now. It's associated with the right important causes, but by God, that can go wrong. I've been in boardrooms and meetings where people go, right, how do we target Gen Z? How do we get them to hold our brand up? And the answer for about 5 years was, we need to tell them about our brand purpose. And then the next comment in the room was, well, what the fuck is our brand purpose? We haven't got one. Let's make one. And I'm slightly, I'm not really exaggerating that. There were so many attempts to try and build status through, aren't we good? We're doing this, we're saving that. And I think consumers could see through it. Status might be changing. Alcohol still has a role to play in it. But what it can't try and do is bandwagon on different causes to try and get status.
So clearly you're not afraid to speak truth in a situation in the interest of the brand or in the interest of consumers. Can you give us some war stories about the art of persuasion internally when a lot of stakeholders are invested in maybe a particular outcome you're not sure about?
No, what I'm here to do is help you make it brilliant. Because if I help you make it brilliant, this is what happens to your brand equity. This is what happens to your market share. This is the return on investment you get. So by flipping it here from I'm here to be the school teacher and pass or fail your research to we're on the same boat, mate. We're here. We're going in the same direction. There's an iceberg over there. I can either tell you there's not one, or I can help you change the direction of the wheel. What do you want me to do? Once you start working in that honest, brand-centric way, people will forgive you if you're sometimes a little bit too honest or too flowery in your language and feedback. It's
really interesting to hear you say, you know, I'm working in the interest of the brand, because I feel like perhaps in research we're the voice of the consumer, and it almost sets up a bit of a tension of going, well, therefore we just need to persuade the consumer, you know, whereas actually what you're saying is we're all pushing in the same direction.
If you want to be objective, you can just use your agency. Our job is to take the new data or insight we have, pass it through the filter of what we know and what we've done before and what we understand, and give a data-based argument to our marketers. Objectivity is something that, you know, I don't want from anyone. I want people to have opinions, else, you know, you might as well just give people an Excel sheet.
I remember once being given some feedback when I worked client side about I was doing a sort of innovation role, and I was given feedback that our job was not to sell, and I couldn't have disagreed more. I mean, our job absolutely is to sell. Our job is not to lie. Our job is not to hoodwink. Our job is not to, you know, sell snake oil.
What was your job then? What was your job meant to be?
What if it wasn't to sell? The feedback I got was, you know, you're just there to be objective and just present the facts. And I'm like, no, my job is to, well, back to the whole point of this podcast. My job is the persuasion game. My job is to do that. But exactly as you say, Paul, you can't persuade if you don't have the reality, the evidence, the proof, the data, the fundamental understanding of what's going on.
It's exactly that. And, you know, it's fundamentally the agencies that I work with that I have the best success with are ones that understand that I'm not paying them for objectivity, I'm paying them for their opinion, an opinion which has been formed using data and research. Opinion. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Fantastic. Are there any particular research capabilities, new ways of discovering things that you're particularly excited about, and why?
I think this industry needs to stop magpieing, as in going for every shiny new thing. Now, I have been an early proponent of AI in a lot of work that I've done. I've done online qual. I've done, you know, so much award-winning stuff, no less, for using AI. However, very often the best research is a good moderator sitting in a room, engaging with people that have been recruited well, having a brilliant conversation, leaning in, looking at the eyes, reading the body language, coming in and debriefing it face-to-face. I had a face-to-face debrief this morning before coming here. I can't tell you the last time I had a face-to-face debrief. The power of it, everyone was listening, everyone was engaging, no one was turning their camera off so they can make a cup of tea or scratch their arse or whatever they're doing. Or, you know, frankly, more often than not, writing an email. Everyone engaged and everyone leaned in and everyone listened. And it was brilliant. So what I'm excited about is that new tools will come and they'll be integrated into our toolkit. But we won't forget the basics of what makes Insight special, which is insightful people taking you through insightful decks in an interesting and engaging way. I wish we'd all remember that's what we're here for sometimes.
Love it.
Brilliant. Paul, I've no doubt we could continue chatting
when the pub
long into an evening over a few glasses of spirits and mixers, no doubt. But listen, we're going to have to call it time there. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been brilliant and incredibly insightful as always. Thank you.
Really great to see you guys. Thanks.
So Laura, absolutely fascinating chat from Paul. Always a man with a strong opinion. An opinion almost as loud and extrovert as his shirts. Paul obviously comes from quite a marketing background. So, that is his world of marketing and insight. But there are a couple of things that I thought really stood out to me today and actually have an applicability beyond the world of just brand marketing. And one of the things that I've really taken from this that I want to talk about is this point around boredom, about telling your story and consistently telling your story. And that as individuals, we think people are bored of stuff way before they actually are. It's interesting. I'm doing a piece of pro bono work for a charity at the moment, and been just looking at some of their sort of marketing materials and stories. And one of the things that's so interesting is that there's this incredible richness to the personal story and the mission that I think because the founder is so close to and sees on a daily basis that it's almost become wallpaper to them.
I've seen that before with founder-led businesses, but they're like, people don't want to know about that. Or like, I've talked about that already. And you're like, I've never heard it. And you've been going 20 years. So clearly you haven't done it as much as you thought you had.
And that power of human connection, that there's an individual and a story, and in a world that sadly, there's quite a lot of cynicism, corporates, that they're not for people like me, that they're big and sort of soulless, but that these human stories that are there just are hidden in plain sight. And I thought it was fascinating, Paul's sort of view that actually, and I have a lot of time for that we just get bored of it, and we assume, because I've heard it a lot, that everyone else has heard it a lot and everyone else is bored.
Yeah, consistency. The one that made me want to stand up and clap was when he said, look, we're meant to be invested. We're meant to have a point of view, and that point of view is to make the brand grow. I do think there's a danger, certainly in the world of research, that because we want to demonstrate robustness, we sort of fall into this lens of like consumer purity, and that gets a bit muddled up with like total objectivity. And I'm just here with the data. No, we're here to sell. We're all here to sell. And actually saying, I'm as invested in you in making this brand really strong is a really interesting way of navigating out of those conflicts between departments. So I loved that. Loved it.
Brilliant.
Thanks for listening. If you'd love to hear more about human behaviour, why we like the things we like, and how brands are harnessing that insight, make sure you're following the podcast in your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. And just a last request from us. This is a new podcast. We'd love it if you could take the time to help us spread the word by telling somebody else about it, or even better, share an episode on social, or search for The Forge on LinkedIn.